The Last of Us, Episode 3. For the past few days, I've been hearing how good Episode 3 is, how it's the best episode of the season. That's coming from critics who have either seen the episode early or they've seen the entire season already. And what's interesting about Episode 3 is that players of the game would have noticed from the trailers that this episode was going to deviate quite a lot and be very different to how the story pans out in the game. And it was as different as you could possibly imagine. It makes some very major changes compared to the game, but ultimately it does still lead to pretty much the same end game and outcome, so the story can continue as it does in the game. Episode 3 was beautiful. It was the definition of writing, acting, and storytelling, and this is one of the best pieces of television I've seen. Bill's town is my favourite segment in the first game. It involves sneaking into his town, killing infected, finding Bill, having arguments, killing more infected, and eventually getting a car battery so you can get a car and leave Bill's town and then continue on with the story. In the game, Bill is a bitter man, arguing with Joel and Ellie, reluctant to help but still doing so, and in all this we get a brief moment where Joel, Ellie and Bill come across a character called Frank. It's his dead body after he's committed suicide because he had been bitten. The whole segment in-game is large, the map is large, there's a lot of infected, there's a lot of action, and Frank is really just a side note in the game, but not here in episode 3. Nearly the whole episode was dedicated to a love story between Bill and Frank, who found each other in a dark time and blossomed a beautiful romance that we get to see unfold here. There are barely any zombies, there's barely any violence in general in this episode. This was really a focus on these characters and their story. And I cannot emphasize how much I love what they did with this episode, the story they decided to tell, the changes they chose to make. It really came together to make a top tier piece of television. You could definitely say that they veered far off from the source material, but it still feels like the same characters. It still feels like the Bill we know from the game in a sense. If things panned out differently, it feels like that would be what Bill would be like if things were different to what we got in this episode here. It still feels authentic. On top of showing this romance, the episode also weaved in Joel and Tess and Ellie through flashbacks and eventually to the present day, and it was all so beautifully paced and put together. Initially, I was unsure of cutting away from Joel and Ellie for so long when we start spending a lot of time with Bill and Frank, but by the end of the episode, I was sad to leave Bill and Frank because I was having such a good time with their story. This episode made things much less sort of action heavy and brutal and harsh compared to the game, instead focusing on more of like an emotional story, but it was all the better for that reason. It had much more of an emotional impact, and I think it was a very brave and bold choice to decide to do this, decide to alter the story in this way. The fact that Ellie and Bill never meet in this episode, Joel never sees Bill without Frank in this episode. In fact, in-game, Joel doesn't even know who Frank was. I've seen that people are unhappy with how this episode panned out because it doesn't include quite memorable and well-known segments from the game. When you go to Bill's town, you get a whole segment where Joel is stuck upside down in a trap and he's shooting infected, and you also get a whole segment where they fight a bloater, and it's the first time you fight a bloater in the game. But I feel like those things work better for the game because they're more about the action. It makes the gameplay obviously more exciting, whereas when it comes to television, you are just sort of a passenger and you're just watching things unfold. You have no control about the events. So I think what they chose to do here works much better for TV than if they'd just taken what happens in game and put it straight into this episode. And genuinely, with this show, I never thought I'd be saying I prefer what they've done in the show compared to the game, because I think the game is flawless. I love everything they do in the game. I think it all pans out perfectly, but I have to say I prefer what they did with this segment of the story compared to how it originally went in the game. There's also really great moments here, like when Bill and Frank have their first meal together. They are sat at opposite ends of the table because Bill is feeling, paranoid. He's got a gun on him. He doesn't trust this man. And then by the end of the episode, they're having their last meal, and, they couldn't be sat closer together. They're right next to each other on the table, and Frank still pulls the same, face when he tastes the food because he's enjoying it so much. It's just, I really like those little moments. I love it when any show or movie does that, where you can compare them side by side from start to finish. And we even get what seemed like a reference to the menu screen at the end of the episode as Joel and Ellie drive away and you see out of the window and it's like the wind is blowing the curtains, which is just like the menu screen from the game, and I think that was a nice little touch. Obviously, I'm sure they've done that on purpose. And I'll be honest, I was tearing up for the last 20 minutes here. The acting from Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett was fantastic. The soundtrack was really strong here today, and the structure of the episode and what it achieved in terms of compelling characters and storytelling was just outstanding. This is no ordinary zombie story, and this is no ordinary zombie television show, and we really could be in for one great season of TV. I would give episode 3 a 10 out of 10. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it. Do you like the changes? And yeah, feel free to let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.